Hello folks, today we're going to take a look at a series of tanks put out by Fluval. They are branded as the Spec brand, and there's a wide variety of sizes from 2.3 gallons to 16 gallons. We're going to go through all of those today. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and normally I do an all aquarium update and I just kind of show you every tank I have and just briefly go over it. What I thought I would do this time instead is just spend the whole month of November going through all my tanks, and probably some of December, going through my tanks and just kind of taking groups of them and explaining them and showing you what's happened with them over the past several months. And this week we're going after the specs. Now, the Spec line kind of covers a lot of different aquariums. They have a very similar filter system to the Flex, which was last week's video. In fact, this filter system is pretty much identical. It's the exact same type of filter. And the maintenance for them is really, really similar too. Now, as you go down in size to the 5-gallon specs and the 2-gallon specs and so on, it pretty much, they have the same internal filter. It's basically an internal box filter. The water makes its way in through one side. Usually in the bigger ones, like this Spec 16 gallon and the Flexes, it has a little chamber that the water passes through, and then it goes through a sponge which contains ceramic. You can also put carbon in there if you want, or anything else, I guess. It passes through there, and then it goes to another chamber wherein a pump brings the water back out into the general aquarium. Now, in my Spec tanks, I like to use those back chambers to hide the heater, and I normally will put it up above the pump. If you have one of these, or a Flex for that matter, and you want to put it in that first chamber, you could also do it there, and it's probably a little safer, and I'll explain why. So when this tank starts to evaporate, you won't see it in the main part of this tank. You'll see it in this back chamber back here. Now, it's kind of hard to see from the perspective that we're looking at right now, but there's a mesh there, and you can kind of see in there, and you can see what the water level is. I had mentioned before when I was talking about the Flex that I was having a problem with the water level being really low in the back pump out chamber. There are a couple of reasons for that. The main reason seemed to be that my filter was just pushed down a little bit too aggressively, a little bit too far. I pulled it up like just a small amount, and that water in the back really evened out, and it became more manageable that way. So even if your sponge is correct, you'll need to keep an eye on it, especially if you go longer than a week without a water change. If you're stretching your water changes out a little bit, and you have a lot of evaporation, because like right now it's really cold and the heat's on, and it just kind of sucks the water out. You'll want to keep an eye on that back chamber, especially if you're keeping your heater in this first area. My recommendation, at least on this one, maybe not the Mega Flex because it kind of combines into one big area in the back, but if you have the regular Flex or if you got the Spec 16, I'd recommend maybe putting your heater in the first chamber, like on the opposite side of this, before it goes through the media. That way it'll still get a lot of water flow, but you will be a little less likely to have the water dip down and see the effects of evaporation right there. And the smaller specs, you're really just going to have to keep an eye on it depending on how you've oriented the tank. If the pump's on the back end or it's on the front end. If it's on the front end, like it is upstairs in my house, you'll be able to see the pump. It'll be right there in the front. If it's turn the opposite way, like my tank at work, sometimes you might want to, like, if you notice the water's getting low, you might want to kind of reach your head around there and make sure that the water level is appropriate for, to submerge your heater and keep it underwater. The real danger there is that if the water gets down too low, it could break the heater and really mess it up. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. I just want to make you aware of it. It's the only I can't really call it an issue with the tank because it kind of is what it is. Water's going to evaporate down and lower the water level. It is kind of a unique issue with this tank. Not that it's an issue, but it is a unique thing that will occur with this tank. And it's just something to be aware of. Once you know, it's not a big deal, but you should know. I've kept different specs for a long period of time. I kind of have trouble imagining this as a spec, because in my mind the spec is always going to be those 5-gallon tanks, those long 5-gallon tanks, or those little tiny 3-gallon tanks, or even the smaller 2-gallon. I've kind of disavowed the 2-gallon tanks. Probably my original popular video. If you guys are brand new, you might not realize that the way I really got started in the aquarium video biz, or whatever you want to call this, is I did an unboxing and setup for the original Fluval Spec. The very first one is like a 2-gallon tank. And Fluval took the video and they put it on their blog, or vlog, or what can't remember what it was called. Yeah, the Fluval blog. So Fluval took that video and they put it on their blog. And they didn't really they had a little bit of a website kind of going, but they haven't figured everything out. They're much more sophisticated now, and they have their own YouTube and do all kinds of stuff. But back then, if you went to their website and you looked up the Fluval Spec, you saw my unboxing and setup video. So that got really popular, and it got me, and kind of inspired me to set up another aquarium and film it, and set up another aquarium and film it, and then... So I've been a Fluval fan for a long, long time. They sent me this aquarium, and I was kind of skeptical because, at first glance, I didn't really like the looks of those lights. I was afraid it wouldn't be strong enough. I thought, what I'll do is I'll replace it and put something stronger on there if it doesn't work. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, it works fantastic. I put some really good quality substrate in there just to make sure it had every good chance it did. Had a little bit of a problem with algae. I didn't like my initial aquascape with it either. I just did a video not too long ago where we went through and we kind of cleaned this tank up a little bit, and you can kind of see where it's grown out since then. I think a question I get a whole lot on this tank is an issue with the timer. A lot of people have bought this tank and then the timer doesn't turn the light on and off the way it normally should. Now, I'm going to move this down so you can see it. I have just a normal, boring timer for this. This is just the El Cheapo. I want to show you. And it turns it off. The day goes by, and it turns it back on. Oops, off, on. Damn it, off. This thing does work on a timer. This particular one does. It was a regular retail copy. I unboxed it. I fully pulled it out of a brand new box. So I don't know what to tell you. So this is a 16-gallon tank. It does have kind of a sister tank. It's a 15-gallon tank with a saltwater light. That light is the exact same size as this light. This light has a little touch thing that I've just messed up. Boop, boop. This light just kind of sits into a slot in the top of this aquarium, and it is the exact same size as the saltwater. So you could, in theory, if you wanted to do this for a saltwater tank, get the bigger freshwater one and then buy the light and then swap it out. But I think if I were going to do that, I would probably buy a light with like a more sophisticated, ramp up, ramp down type scenario, like the Aqua Sky type lights. I would buy a more sophisticated one and add it on here. This tank has a mix of a lot of small fish in it. It's got a whole bunch of celestial pearl danios, and it's got rosy loaches, it's got a couple of neurite snails, I've got a half beak at the top, a couple of Amano shrimp, and a whole lot of cherry red shrimp in here. I don't normally do a lot of tank maintenance on this tank. I did go through and trim out some dead leaves and try to clean it up for the video so it looks as nice as possible. There are a couple other things I've noticed with this specific version of the spec, and a little bit with the flexes as well. They have the exact same pump. Now the Mega Flex has a bigger version of the pump, but this has the same pump as the 15-gallon Flex, and maybe the 9-gallon Flex. I haven't really looked inside a 9-gallon before. I have noticed the flow gets really, really low with this thing if that gets clogged up, and I have to pull it out a great deal more than I do pretty much any of my other pumps, even the specs. A lot of times with this spec, with the 5 gallons especially, I'm not going to put a big fish in there, or I'll put one betta in there, and they don't like a lot of flow. So I don't mind if the pump gets a little slower than normal and maybe it's not pumping at full efficiency, as long as it's really moving the water a bit. But in here, I do like to keep the water flow up a little bit more. The fish that are in there, I think will appreciate it, and it's important to kind of keep the circulation going really well because it's so densely planted. Since I've rescaped it, I've really loved this tank. I really like the second scape that I did for it. And I'm glad that I went the extra mile for the substrate that's in it too, because it's had a really good effect. I'm seeing a lot of growth in here. Not all of it's as fast as I would like. Of course, I tried the Crypt carpet again, and that's only kind of working out. I've also got some clover mixed in, and this clover's doing something kind of odd. Like, usually the 4-leaf clover underwater will sprout like little 1-leaf runners that'll go out. And the 4-leaf ones, the more clovery looking leaves, is above the water. This one seems to be sprouting them underwater. Like, I haven't seen that before, but it's got little runners, and I've got way too many of the multi-leaf clovers under here. A lot more than I started with, because I just had this little patch, and it's grown out almost all the way to the side here. And I've got some single leaves, but I've got a lot of multi-leaf ones too, and I was surprised to see that. Now, the water changes I've been doing with this tank have been sort of a mixed bag. I've done some like regular water changes. Again, as a rule of thumb, I do about 20%. I don't pull the filter out a great deal in this. If you do need to pull the filter out, it's pretty easy. It kind of pulls right out the top, and then you take in some aquarium water that maybe you've just pulled out for the water change. Give it a nice rinse off the media, put it all back in, and stick it back in the back. It's real simple. I like to pull mine out every month, maybe every 2 months, and give it a rinse. But even if sometimes I've gone longer than that. But it's important to do it every now and then to kind of get the debris cleared out of there and make it so it's more an effective filter. Now, as for my tank at work, has been doing great, and I've enjoyed having it there. I gave it a little bit of a trim. Now, this is pre-trim. I was scared to trim it before I filmed it. And I've since trimmed out some of the dead leaves and other things that kind of develop in there. I haven't had real aggressive plant growth. I have noticed that the plants have started to grow back now that I've added a little bit of calcium to the water. And I did that by adding a bag of crushed coral to the mix. I put it in one of the back chambers. That hardened up the water a little bit more. I think the water that I was using to actually do my water changes there at work was really soft. It's probably pre-filtered. But I give that a 20% water change once a week, kind of scrape the glass, and mostly I ignore it. I just kind of feed the fish once a day and enjoy their company. If you want to know more about this tank, I think I shot a video called That Kevin Tank, and well, maybe that was an update. But I shot it for a coworker who then left, and then I took over the tank when they left. It's been looking really good, and in fact, I think I like it a little bit better than the one here. It's not really growing plants though. I'm adding a little bit of fertilizer. I'm trying to trim a little bit, but it's never hit that point where the plants grow the way I'd like. They're growing really super slow, but they're not, and I'm not getting a ton of algae now, which is good. Just a little bit of blackbeard algae, like a really tiny, manageable amount of blackbeard. So it's kind of a trade-off. You know, it doesn't require a lot of work, but it's not doing like astounding growth. It's not anything like this where I have to go in and trim this every so often, or it just looks like a jungle. It doesn't do that. And maybe that's okay for a work tank. I do think between 5 and 8 gallons is a really perfect size to keep it work. It's not too big, it's not a lot to maintain it, but it's not so small that things could get like toxic over a weekend in there. Now back here at the house, I've got another spec, the exact same model, upstairs in my bedroom. That one's pretty much it's got almost the same setup as it did when I first set it up. And that was in a video called, what was it? Mini Gardens. And in Mini Gardens, I'd put these little glass, I think they're actually little feeder things, but they looked like little vases, and I'd set those up. Well, the plants had grown out of the vases. It was a dwarf Sagittarius. It had grown out of the vases. It had gone all the way through the middle of the tank and just taken over the tank. And in fact, I did a spooky video earlier in the year called Point of View. And in Point of View, I kind of look over at that tank and decide that I'm going to pull the grass out. So I pulled all the dwarf sag, which had grown incredibly long and really big. Not very dwarf at all. I took all of that out and I put it in an old Fluval Flora with the face in it. So after I stripped that out, I wasn't sure what was going to happen with that tank or if I'd end up taking it down, but it didn't affect it very much at all. It's got a really huge Anubis Nano on one end and kind of like some sparse little areas that's got some Monte Carlo in it. I'm pretty sure that Monte Carlo could use a root tab or something because it's not dying, but it's not like spreading out and growing like I see it in other tanks. The Anubis has kind of been balled up. It seems like it's been growing into itself there in the corner. It hasn't ventured too far off from that corner, but it has gotten bigger and it's kind of spiraled up with layers and layers of itself. I have gone through and trimmed up a bunch of leaves in there, a bunch of dead leaves, a bunch of leaves the snails ate. And that's really good to do with those Anubias every once in a while, just to kind of promote some growth, you know, and take some of those non-productive leaves out. So it'll be interesting to see how this one does. Again, it's not growing the plants at a tremendous rate. It's kind of keeping them alive and letting them grow really slow. With good substrate, I was able to get, like when that substrate was fresh, I got a really nice carpet of Monte Carlo in there before the dwarf sage took over and kind of like really sapped all the nutrients out of the soil. Or perhaps a plant like the clover here I pointed out earlier. But it will grow plants. It will grow plants to a certain degree, but if you put some slow growing plants in there too, it's not going to be so effective that it's going to be a lot of maintenance for you, depending on what plants you pick. And of course with any plant tank, you've got to get over that hump, you know, you've got to get over that algae hump where everything's kind of out of whack. When you first set up an aquarium, it's going to have more nutrients in it than it ever will at any other time, and things just kind of go crazy. Like it'll start to grow really well and then to go bad, or maybe you'll have a big ammonia spike and then, you know, plants start to die and things get ugly. The algae comes and then you got to just fight your way through it. But once your tank kind of matures, you can make adjustments, even large adjustments, without just kind of killing the tank altogether. So I have one more spec. This was sold as the Fluval EB. I opened it, I actually can't remember how long ago it was since I opened it. And I made a nice little kind of interesting aquascape with that, with some small cholla wood, you know, sliced cholla wood planters almost, and the plants coming out. That tank is still up and going. I have basically ignored it. I haven't done a water change on it in months. There's no creatures in it anymore. I'd kept some shrimp in it. Their population went up for a little while and then it kind of dwindled down and dwindled down. Because they were a different color shrimp, I didn't mix them in with the rest of the population. I did try to get them going. I tried to bring them out and put them into another tank, but then that didn't work out either. So after the shrimp had pretty much died off in the tank, I kind of lost interest in it, like as far as like keeping it up, and I just kind of left it to see what it would do. Sometimes with tanks like this, it's growing plants really well, it's established, I'll just let it keep growing those plants and I just top off the water. So with that tank, the only thing I've been doing for months is pouring some extra water in it to kind of keep it topped off. And the reason I do that versus just taking it down or putting a fish in it and starting over is if I can ignore it, it's not a lot of work, then it's just going to sit there and grow plants for me. So if I decide to start another aquascape, I've got some like ready grown plants that are good to go. And it's growing a number of different plants in there. So I've been kind of keeping that going so I can set up another aquascape later. I'm not even sure I'll use the plants that are in there, but by virtue of what's going on in there, I can tell you that the light does grow plants. And if you put in the substrate the way I set up the Fluval EB, which I think was just with the house, like the Fluval stratum that it came with, it's going to grow plants for you. And grow them pretty well. I think that actually that one, probably because it's a little bit more shallow, I don't know if it's a lot more shallow. Well, it's like half of the 5 gallon. Like it's like if you took one of their 5 gallon tanks and you cut it in half. But it seems to grow light. It's a little bit, maybe the light's more intense over that little cluster that's over the top of it, but it seems to grow plants better than the 5 gallon ones do. And that's it. That's all the Fluval specs. I'm going to move on to another category. I think next week I'll be showing you my marine land tanks, which is the 27 gallon cube and the 57 gallon column tank upstairs. But I've got a couple more Nanos and a whole bunch more stories for you coming up real soon. Don't forget to leave a comment in the comments down below. Congratulations to this person who just won.
Chattanooga Ed is the winner.
I am giving away a filter every week this month. So you have a chance of winning a Marineland Pro 375 filter. All you have to do to win is leave a comment. And if you don't see a pinned comment at the bottom of the comments there, you can still win. So go ahead and leave a comment to win. I can only ship in the United States. The details are in the description. I will be picking a name next Saturday. But until next time, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. The main reason was I need my. If it's on the front end like it is upstairs in my house. If it's on the front end, or perhaps a plant like or perhaps a plant like the. I didn't realize this was my badge. I didn't realize this was wearing my badge, my work badge. I couldn't see it on my shirt.